Hi, guys. Welcome to Gex and Specs and Friends. Today, I'm joined by a fellow podcaster, Strength in Leos. Evan also does breeding with decked out geckos, and I just want to let him introduce himself. Hi, Evan.
Hi, so I'm Evan, host of the Strength and Leo's podcast, and I also have my gecko business, Decked Out Geckos.
Hi. So I'm kind of curious, what originally made you want to start doing your podcast? Because I like to hear like from the other side, the other perspective.
Yeah, so for me, I thought that there was kind of a lack of community
Mm-hmm.
in the leopard gecko hobby, specifically within that sector again of the reptile community, and I kind of felt like there was almost a gap within that. So I thought
Mm-hmm.
that maybe that making this podcast would sort of fill that gap that we were having within the reptile community. And I thought that if I was able to do this and bring something new to the reptile community, I know that we've had sort of leopard gecko YouTubers that have been big in the past
Mm-hmm.
and other radio shows and things of that sort, but bringing something new, something that was reoccurring to the leopard gecko community, if you will, that would kind of reinvigorate some of the community that we had. And I
Yep.
have seen that a little bit with my podcast. So that was kind of a little bit of background just to educate and bring people together around leopard geckos, which is something that I'm very passionate about. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the ideals and the kind of the reason why I started the podcast.
That's really cool. Yeah, like I remember I just like happened to stumble upon your podcast and I've never seen anything at least based around leopard geckos. So like I was super excited, especially because you have so many different kinds of breeders and like people who have been in the hobby, say 20 plus years that you've had guests on. And it's just really interesting to hear all those like different perspectives, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I try to incorporate within my podcast. Not
Mm-hmm.
only people who are leopard gecko veterans that I've had on, like Marshall McGinnis or Ron Shrimper,
Mm-hmm.
but also people who have been in the hobby not as long, but are still making, let's say, a statement, I guess you could
Yeah.
call it, in the way that they're creating awesome leopard geckos and also doing it in a way that's being ethical and also creating more people to get behind leopard geckos and what they
The
mean in the reptile
hobby.
community. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm honestly curious, what is it for you, like with leopard geckos? Like, what makes you so attracted to them as a species, making you want to breed them, making you want to do this podcast about them? Like, what is it with you, like personally, that attracts you to them?
Well, to go all the way back, let's like 4 or 5 years ago when I got my first leopard gecko.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, even longer than that. Actually, more like 7 years ago when I got my first leopard gecko. I just thought they were a really interesting species because there's in the leopard gecko community, there's a lot known about them in captivity, but in the wild there's not a lot known about leopard geckos, which is
Mm-hmm.
really fascinating, and that's something that's really different than something like, say, a bearded dragon or other lizard species that are available out there. So that's something that really captivated me, not only from the keeping standpoint but also the scientific standpoint, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak. So really that's what got me into leopard geckos. And then breeding, I remember stumbling upon Matt Baronik's videos from Sassobek and just looking at the huge collection he had and some of the awesome morphs he was producing. Um, Seeing those videos really got me interested in learning about genetics and husbandry and just everything that goes around keeping leopard geckos. And that's something that I try to preach on my podcast, is that it's not just for the money. It's not just morphs. It's not just, creating the best looking leopard gecko. There's a lot of different perspectives that you could really take on leopard geckos and learn from them, which is something that I love so much. And I think that's really what got me on the breeding track. And then going even
Mm-hmm.
further, onto my podcast, it's really just my curiosity. And I think that's something that a lot of people hear from me on the podcast, and even me talking now. I'm always asking questions on how I could better myself as a keeper, a breeder, and just as a hobbyist within the reptile community. And my curiosity is really what fuels me to do more and learn more. So my podcast is sort of a way to answer those questions. So if I have a question with a breeder, I could go up to John Scarborough and talk to him for an hour and a half, 2 hours about subspecies or about a new morph that's coming out. Or I could go on to Ron Trimper and ask him, oh, how did the Trimper and Eclipse pop up into your collection? Or I could go out to a zoologist or a herpetologist and ask him, oh, where are leopard geckos in the wild, or where are you finding them, and subspecies have been described, and even stuff that hasn't been described yet. So I think in general, those questions and those main ideas of curiosity is what really fuels my podcast and what really keeps me interested in leopard geckos and just reptiles in general.
I think that's really like fascinating as like you were saying like the subspecies. Like I don't think people understand like with leopard geckos like how many different subspecies there are and like how that they're now starting to come into the pet trade as well. I'm not the best with scientific names, but the common like leopard gecko that we see in the pet trade, I'm sure you could probably name the scientific name, but that there's actually more subspecies now actually from that coming in that we haven't seen before. I don't know if you've looked into that, but I've definitely seen that, and I find it like really exciting seeing people keep different subspecies of leopard gecko now. Like it's just really interesting, especially even hearing like listening to your podcast, like how morphs like have started or like how people just made out of two normals like these morphs have appeared over time like genetically because I'm really interested in like genetics and like biology and stuff like that. So like listening to over time like how recessive traits come to a head and stuff and like how all of that works. Like obviously if it's ethical, but it's like a really interesting thing to like hear from someone who basically some people that even now are creating these new morphs and it's just amazing to see like this just like pop up in the trade. Like I don't know, I think it's really interesting like
No,
genetic
yeah,
side of it.
definitely. Especially with the subspecies, and not even subspecies, but with the pure eublepharous species like Eublepharus angermanu and things like that. You have this huge diversity within Eublepharus with all these amazing morphs, and you have so many different options to choose from, which I think is also unique in leopard geckos and ball pythons, which is another big thing in the reptile
Yeah.
hobby. You see these people paying thousands of dollars for these awesome morphs, but they don't have these cool subspecies and these cool ranges of different morphs and localities, which is really awesome to see how maybe a Eublepharus macularis turkmenicus changes from a Eublepharus macularis macularis, and all these different unique subspecies and species within Eublepharus. It's really awesome to kind of see those and see the differentiations between all of them in leopard geckos.
No, like I think it's really just like such a because it's so like common now, like people don't really look into all of that. Like I do think like stuff like Uromastics are really cool, but like you were saying, like the genetic studying of leopard geckos and their ability to like transform in a sense, like you could see something like a tangerine all the way to a snow, like just that much of a range to have traits vary from in the same species and locale. It's just really fascinating to me, like how many different like morphs or anything. As like I said, it's a really interesting hobby. I know you work with tangerines, so I was kind of curious, like what originally got you into tangerines? Did you start with them, or was it just like you kind of over time got into them? Like what did you originally start with, and how did you get to the tangerines?
Yeah, so with the tangerines, I think it was just really a morph that was really popular at the time of me getting into the hobby. So it kind
Mm-hmm.
of worked in perfectly with not just like I was jumping on the tangerine train, but it was something that really caught my eye when I got into leopard geckos. And a lot of people think, oh, tangerine, all you could get is an all orange gecko. But there's a lot of things that you could do with tangerines, and there's a lot of ways you could take it. You could take it more into the emarine line where you're line breeding for green. You could get almost a jungly looking tangerine
Mm-hmm.
with pattern with the oranges and the hues of orange in a tangerine. If you want less caretail, you could go for that, or more caretail, you can. So there's just a lot of variation with tangerine. And actually, my first actual pairing that I got viable eggs from
Mm-hmm.
was a tangerine pairing. So it was two tangerine het shrimpers from
Okay.
George over at Golden Valley Reptile. So I think he was a really big mentor to me, and he did a lot of stuff with tangerines. I like tangerines. So it was kind of just the stars aligning for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he works with a lot of the Golden Gate Gecko Sunlow lines in the bloodline. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where my original stock from Tangerine came from. And then I got some more Tangerine stock from Chris over at Suburban Geckos. and he really does a lot of great work with gecko genetics and blood
Mm-hmm.
crosses. So that cross came from, it was originally done by John over at Gecko Boy, and then Chris did a little bit more work with that. So that's where I got my other tangerine stock from. So I kind of sort of have two lines of tangerine, so to speak, that I'm working with over here at Decked Out Geckos. But yeah, those are kind of what got me into tangerines and sort of the lines that I'm working with.
Okay. So speaking on, if you could explain maybe for people who don't understand how line trait breeding works with the tangerines, if you just wanted to go into depth with that, like how line breeding works with tangerines. I find that like really interesting for maybe people who don't understand that or know about it.
Yeah, so well, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the original tangerines that we see today, I think a lot of that came from Rayhine over in the UK. I might be incorrect on that, but I think that's where
Mhm.
the original tangerine stock, that a lot of the stuff that we have in the US came from. So
Mhm.
from there, a lot of breeders were just seeing a couple orange specks on leopard geckos, and from then, tangerine is a line bred trait. So over time, breeders are breeding the orange geckos to the orangest geckos to get the again another bright orange gecko, and from that oranger and oranger, and from that line breeding,
Mhm.
they're basically getting tangerines, and from that a lot of breeders differentiated what they had from their stock, and then that's where you might hear different lines of tangerine. So Golden Gate geckos, or Gecko Genetics, which came from Jason Haygood, or Blood, which came from
Mhm.
JMG, and all these different lines of tangerine, Infernos from Pat Klein. These are all different variations of that tangerine line bred morph or trait, if you want to call it, and that's where
Mhm.
basically the tangerine comes from.
Oh, it's really interesting to hear. So, for this season, if you are breeding this season, what tangerines are you working with and what are you hoping to produce this season?
Yeah, so for me, I didn't really get any new tangerine stock. It's kind
Okay.
of just refining, excuse me, what I have before. So a
Mhm.
lot of the Gecko Genetics blood stuff, I'm working on that um, to line breed. What's really interesting about that line is I've seen, and I also talked to Chris over at Suburban Geckos, is
Mhm.
that um, there's kind of two almost varying lines of that, where you have the really bright hot red oranges, almost electric looking, not the
Yeah.
electric line, but that really bright tangerine color with the really awesome carrot tail. And then you see sort of a darker looking gecko genetics blood, which is something that I've seen, and that's kind of the two directions I'm going with that. And then with my other tangerines, I'm just looking to clean up the pattern a little bit and then add a little bit more to the carrot tail.
I find that like just it's really interesting to hear you talk about that because like you were saying tangerines like it's so interesting within that morph that how much it varies because like say something like Murphy's patternless, like it's always they kind of look very similar if they're just Murphy patternless, but with tangerines because of all the subsections of it, like how you could basically breed something that looks completely different than an other tangerine because of how many different like you were saying like bloodline and stuff like that. It's just I don't know, I find tangerines really cool. I work personally with snows. Like I find snows very fascinating as well. Because I feel like with snows, at least in my experience, you will never find one with the exact same patterning, especially when you get into stuff like pied or like adding in a little tremper into that. Like it's really interesting to see an all white gecko with like orange striping and whatnot. Like it's really like I don't know. I find tangerines like super duper cool, which is why I was really excited to talk with you about them because they're such a rad morph to work with. Like I just find
Yeah,
them super
definitely.
fascinating. Um, like I was gonna ask you originally, when was your first breeding season?
So this season, this is my fourth.
Oh wow.
I think it's my fourth season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my fourth season. Yeah, this will be my fourth season breeding. Yeah.
Okay. How old were you, if you don't mind me asking, like when you originally got into breeding, like out of curiosity?
13, 14-ish. I
Oh
think that
wow.
was like my first time like breeding. Yeah. It wasn't the best breeding season,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that was like when I got my feet wet into breeding leopard geckos.
That's
Yeah. So
really
a really
cool.
young age compared to a lot of
Oh
people.
yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Um, someone who's getting into it now at 19, like I like seeing you who's been in the this is your fourth breeding season. Like it's just so fascinating to me how you started very, very young compared to other breeders who like a lot of people who get into it, I think are in their at least like early mid 20s usually. That's what I usually see like from my friends that I have that are getting into it as well. So it's just like to see you accomplish so much at such a young age and to start breeding and getting into the scientifics of it at a young age. Like that's really like fascinating to me. I wanted to go a little bit more in depth. Like what made you decide like finally like okay, like yeah, I think I'm ready to breed. Like I want to breed like at 13 to 14. Like what made you decide to do that?
Well, for me, I knew that I did a ton of research. So
Mhm.
any article or video I could get my hands on, even talking to other breeders, I just was a sponge and I tried to grab as much information as possible. And I remember that the year before I had my first breeding season, I wanted to breed so bad, but I kind of held myself back to make sure that I really knew what I was doing and I knew what I was getting myself into because I think a lot of people just dive in head first and have no
Oh
idea
yeah.
what they're doing and are trying to learn on the whim basically. And not that there's like anything terribly wrong with that. I know sometimes people accidentally breed their leopard geckos by accident and say they have a male and a female or whatever the case may be, but I knew that I wanted to go into this the quote unquote right way.
Yeah, I know what you
So,
mean.
yeah, that was just me being me. That's how I am. I try to do everything the best I can to the best of my ability and
Mhm.
knowing as much as possible. And even with that, you can't prepare for everything. There is some bumps along the way and some things
Yeah.
that you might not be able to learn from a YouTube video or an article that just takes experience. That's just how leopard gecko breeding is, and a lot of things are. So for me, it was just again trying to grab as much information as possible and pick up little things on the way that I could take back and next season I could go and improve on. So I'm refining things. Even to this day, I'm still refining how I do certain things and how I do my breeding operations and how I do certain pairings. So again, that just comes with time and learning on the way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that like 100%. Like I don't feel like anyone should go into it expecting to be perfect like right off the bat or to have like everything work out like 100%. Like it's something that does take time and like you were saying experience like over time. Like I've had people recently like in my friend group because I work with people like to spread misinformation and get rid of that and information in general. And I actually had someone reach out to me who was like, "Oh, I want to breed," and I wanted to breed. I think they had like a rainwater, and they wanted to breed. I'm trying to remember. It was another strain of albino. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, which like is a big no-no. You don't want to breed like two strains of albino because then you're never going to know what you really have. And I was like talking with them about it, and then they didn't understand that. So I think it's really interesting to hear from your side, like actually taking your time and getting ready to get into it because like I'm not even as someone who is currently waiting to breed till I'm like 100% ready and like certain. I do think it's very smart to at least wait. I would like in my opinion, I would love to hear yours too. At least maybe a year to 2 years with your stock and like make sure you're fully ready for the experience of it versus just buying a bunch of animals and then breeding that year. Like I feel like that's a little too much. Like you really need to be ready and do research, I think, for a decent amount of time personally, like my personal opinion, till you're fully ready and to do things the right way. But I'm curious, like, your opinion on that. Like, with when do you think, like, people, in your opinion, what do you think makes someone ready to be a breeder, in your opinion, to do it the right way?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with what you're saying and the
Mm-hmm.
approach of how that's done and how leopard gecko breeding is. I don't think there's a certain time frame or a certain amount of animals you should have. I can't just say it's a magic number. Oh, 2 years and 12 animals you'll be ready to breed.
Yeah,
But it's sort of just, I don't know. It's almost like experience, and you'll know when you're ready. There's in 5 years leopard geckos will still be there. In 2 years leopard geckos will still be there.
they're not
So
going
there's
anywhere.
no reason to really go in and rush into things. Um, so yeah, it's not really just a magic number to go and say, "Oh yeah, 2 years, I'll be ready." It's the same thing like with having a human child. You can't say, "Oh yeah, at 23, I'm gonna have a kid," right? It's not. That's not
Yeah.
how it works. Even though you might plan for something to be that way, or you might think you'll be ready. That might not be the right time for you. It might not be the right time for your significant other or whatnot. So with that, it just really comes with experience, and you'll really know when you're ready. And when the time comes, it'll be the time to go and go into your projects with the mindset that you're going to produce nice quality animals, and also
Mm-hmm.
adding to the genetic stock and the genetic variation to what we already have in the hobby. And I think this goes along with a post I actually recently made. I forgot it
Yeah.
was this week or last week, where I talked about going into leopard gecko breeding with the idea that you're not just going to produce things that have already been created before. You're going to go in producing high quality animals using ethics and just common knowledge, and go and produce something that's going to better the leopard gecko community and increase the quality of genetics and everything that's going around with producing leopard geckos. And I actually got a lot of positive and feedback on that post, because a lot of people were saying, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I could have, 10 leopard geckos
Mm-hmm.
wherever, and as long as I'm selling them as pet onlys or whatever, I could still do that or produce
Ooh.
that." But where I'm coming from is the fact that we already have that stuff. So there's no reason to animals that are going to be mudding up, so to speak, with the genetic stock. A lot of really big breeders, or not even big breeders, but mid-sized breeders who are creating leopard geckos and are going for that high quality. A lot of the stuff that they're doing from test breeding, or just geckos that, for whatever reason, aren't able to be used for breeding, a lot of that overstock gets used for pet quality geckos, or those quote unquote, pet geckos. Not to say that
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with them or anything, but those pet geckos. So going into the hobby with a wholesaling mindset, saying that, oh, I'm just going to produce whatever, I don't think that's something that we really need. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that we could take from me going from interviewing ball python breeders, or other sectors of the hobby that have been known for producing high quality animals and are selling animals for a good price, because that's how their market is. And if we create a market that's down selling ourselves, that's basically us shooting ourselves in the foot. So if we go in, I don't, and that's not saying, go buy a $800 pair of
Yeah.
tangerines, but go in with the mindset saying, oh, I really love this infernal leopard gecko, and I'm going to cross it to this firewater leopard gecko, and I'm going to go produce something that may not have been produced before, and it's going to be super unique. And I know the quality of the genetics. I'm going to buy it from Gecko Bow, and I'm going to buy it from this breeder. And you have that mindset that I'm going to produce something that's going to be high quality, and I'm going to be um, varying genetic stock, if that makes sense. Not to go on a rant or anything, but
No, 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 like, please do. Like, I remember seeing that post and commenting on it. I didn't know that because I went back occasionally, but I didn't know there were people that were commenting like, "Oh, like, I just breed pet only geckos. There's no problem with that." Like, I could go on a rant like you just did. Like, I probably could go on a 2-hour rant
yeah,
about that.
a lot of
Like,
it came from Facebook though. So
oh,
yeah,
yeah,
like I knew a lot
makes
of people
sense.
shared that post into certain Facebook groups, and a lot of people weren't happy with what I was saying, because a lot of those people were the ones who were buying $25 leopard geckos from Petco or PetSmart and breeding those things. And even though they may think that those are two normals and you're just gonna get pure normals,
You
a
don't know
lot
what
of
their heads
those
are.
animals come from, exactly, they come from
Yeah.
wholesale breeders who are just crossing things to things, and who knows what missing heads are in there. And that's not saying that you can't go and breed leopard geckos,
Hmm.
but go out and do it the right way, and go and produce something that's gonna better the hobby, or do something that hasn't really been done in a while. Like, I know some people commented on that post, well, what's wrong with breeding Max Snows or just breeding blizzards? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's a sector and there's a place for those things in the hobby. If you could produce a nice Max Snow line that is non-het, that's perfect. If you could go and produce a blizzard line that's non-het, that's perfect. But don't go out and just breeding a blizzard that you got from Petco and a blizzard that you got from PetSmart, saying that you're going to produce pure blizzards when
Blizzards.
that's
Yeah.
not what they're be. Yeah, exactly.
No, like I always like I know what you're talking about. Like people that just think like buying like they don't ask like where their animals came from or even the lineage of their animals and they're like I'm just gonna breed it and I'm just gonna say they're blizzards because they're blizzards. Like, but that's not it. Like, there's hets that go into that, and you could be breeding something that has a mystery het that, for example, could be very damaging to the offspring that could cause issues. Like, you don't know what the genetics of those animals are. Like, more so than if you were to buy from a reputable breeder, like, you don't understand what the genetics of the animal is. Like, it's just like a very dangerous ballpark. You see a lot of that with I know what you're talking about with like in the leopard gecko community, but also in the crested gecko community with breeding that can get really big too, because people use the excuse that crested geckos it's not necessarily like Punnett square genetics. It's more like random, which it's not technically, but that's a whole nother topic. Um, but like you'll see a lot of that too, where they're like, oh, it's fine. But like I honestly am one of those people that first off, like, and just me personally, I don't really agree with buying from pet stores just because of like the whole issue that a lot of their animals aren't in good condition. But also, you are potentially breeding animals that have a lot of inbreeding because a lot of wholesale breeders do a lot of inbreeding or possible things that are going to damage your offspring. And you could be potentially selling like damaged offspring to people. And like, that's not okay. Like, you have to be like completely transparent and honest. Like, you can't say something like you were saying, like a pure blizzard when you don't know for certain, like, if it could have possible heads, like because you literally don't know. Sorry, like I know I'm going off on a rant, but like I really
Yeah, no,
like
I
get
totally agree
irritated by
with you.
those people.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like I just why? Just like why? Like I feel like I don't know your opinion, but I feel like as a leopard gecko market, it's already a little oversaturated as it is. Like why bring in something even more that we don't need necessarily? Like we don't need more animals with a bunch of mystery headset where like, oh well, let's figure it out together. Like we don't need that anymore. We can breed ethically happy like animals and like not necessarily to say all things with hets are bad. Like hets are good to a degree as long as you know they have those hets. Like when you have an animal that could have 20 possible hets, like that's an exaggeration, but I'm just saying like and you don't know, you're like, "Oh, it could be het for this. I don't know. It might be. Let's find out." Like that's just not really smart to go into it because you don't know what you're going to get. Like you could have something that at least in my opinion could have enigma in it and I would never like you don't I don't know, maybe some people do. I wouldn't want to produce enigmas personally. But you could breed something with that could have neural issues or like kinking issues with the spine and the tail. Like you just don't know, and it's just not a good way to go into it. Because also you're going to be stuck. I feel like with offspring that no one's going to buy necessarily, at least breeders, because nobody wants that. And also, I feel like that just damages your reputation as a breeder. It makes people kind of give you the side eye, like, what are you doing? I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, I went off on a tangent,
No,
but
no, no, but yeah, I completely agree with that.
no, I remember like I didn't see the Facebook side of it, but on the Instagram side, like it seemed pretty like chill. Was it not chill on the Facebook side? Were people like getting like a little heated? Like I'm kind of
Yeah, well,
curious.
I think on Facebook, I have a larger reach on Facebook, so I think it got
Hmm.
to more people. And then once people started actually sharing it, I think that's when people, started. Everybody has strong opinions, and I'm fine with that. But
Yeah.
just the way that some people kind of interpreted it, and I know a lot of people can interpret different things, especially through text. But you know how people get, especially in the leopard gecko community. So that's really
Yeah.
just how it went. Yeah.
Oh, trust me. Yeah, I know. I know. I've been in arguments with people like just because like I don't know your like I don't like believe in breeding enigmas. I feel like we don't need them. And like someone I remember was arguing with me and they were comparing it to autism and I was like, okay, not the same thing, but okay. Like it's just weird like how like aggressive and into it people can get. Like I mean, go for it, be all into it, but like the crazy amount of arguments that you will get, like it's just like what are you I mean, okay, go off. I don't know. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just weird.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
not the biggest fan of Enigma, Lemon Frost, even nor does or Black Eye. I'm not really big fans of those more. So, in my
um,
opinion, I would never breed any of those things. But some I can't control what other people
what people
have
do.
in their
Yeah.
community or in their stock. So I wouldn't buy from those people either. So that's just how I do it. I separate myself from them and then only go with people who have a similar breeding mindset and ethics mindset as me, and that's really how I make sure that my collection is doing well, and I have make sure that other people who buy my stock um have high quality genetics that know that I'm gonna breed my animals in a certain way with these certain ethics.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100% as someone who would like I would never like I always make sure like to like at least when I buy from people, I look back at lineage and stuff like that too because like it's just it's very very important that you don't get something at least for me like I would never want anything with enigma in my stock like that's just something like I personally don't believe in breeding like you said like you can't stop people. I'm not going to change the world overnight, but like I feel like it's very very important if you're getting into breeding to make sure you know like the lineage of the geckos you are buying, like know their parents. If they can backtrack those parents, grandparents, amazing, but like know what you're buying. Like be very, very careful. Like, cause like someone could be great or seem great, but that doesn't, they might not have the quality animal or the lineage to tell you about that animal. Like, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. And even me, I've had enigmas in the past. I've never bred
Mm-hmm.
an enigma, but I bought enigmas from people in the past, and I saw um some of the issues that they were having, and then from there I got rid of all the enigmas in my collection. But that's just something that that's something that I chose to do, and even though I wasn't breeding them, I still kept them in my collection. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I've never bred enigmas, but I made that decision and then from there I went, okay, I have them, I know what issues that they're having, I've gotten advice for other breeders that I look up to, so I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of all these enigmas in my collection. And that's kind of how things go, and you should always go ahead and make that decision for yourself.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if you're not too uncomfortable answering this question, but with your enigmas, like, did you notice like that their neuro issues like ranged from animal to animal, or like what like did were they all very similar? I've never worked with enigmas, so I'm just curious. Like, did their neuro issues like range different from animal to animal, or were they very similar? Like the
Yeah,
severity, I
so
mean.
there's no, yeah, so there's definitely some variation that you can notice.
Mm-hmm.
Some enigmas are worse than others, and even I've heard stories of enigmas that have no issue and then producing babies that won't eat, or their enigma syndrome is essentially too bad for them to even function. So I've definitely I had 3 enigmas in my whole breeding, so to speak, career, and
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely had a really great enigma and good lines of enigma where I've never had any issues, but then I've also had a really bad leopard gecko with enigma syndrome where you saw the stargazing, the flipping of the
Yeah.
head, issues eating, a little bit of a slow grower. So I kind of saw the variation within enigmas, and there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a spectrum of enigma syndrome.
I just find that sorry, like I just had to ask because like I've
Yeah,
heard from people differentiating things on enigmas, and as someone you did work with them, so I was kind of like, huh, I wonder. Um, but no, I definitely like, I feel like enigmas are their own separate thing. And like I said, that's like for people's own personal choice to make. Like, you know, there's people that think that cutting like their eggs early is okay. Like, no, I don't mean helping, but literally cutting and forcing an animal out of the egg early is okay. And that's their deal. But like you were saying, like, I think it's best to surround yourself with people that you also agree with and just like maybe ignore that side that maybe you don't like. Like, not be aggressive or angry or be attackatory, whatever. Like it's a word, but like just not attack people. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like I feel like in the reptile community, people get very heated, very, very, very quickly, like very quickly, and it's kind of scary how quickly people can get aggressive and forget that there's like actually a human behind that screen. Even over little things. Like I don't know if you've run into any of that, but I just feel like the reptile community as a whole can be very aggressive sometimes. Sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the Facebook groups are a part of that. And that's where most of that comes from. And I think that's something that I try to keep away from in the podcast, where I go and I bring on breeders so I know are doing their due diligence as a breeder to make sure that they're breeding they're breeding with ethical genetics, and they have a mindset
Mm-hmm.
to do their due diligence as a breeder. So on my podcast I do try to preach that, and even in my own collection make sure that I'm buying from ethical breeders, and telling people if they are looking for something, pointing them in the direction to go to someone who is doing things the right way. And as a reptile community, as a leopard gecko market, we vote for our dollar, right? So if you're supporting someone who's breeding 100,000 geckos in a warehouse or whatever, with unknown genetics, or even if they are breeding things with known genetics, their history, are they breeding lemon frost? Are they breeding enigmas on a massive scale? If you're gonna continue to buy from them, then you're supporting that breeder, regardless if you're buying those lemon frost or enigmas. If they're still keeping those in their collection, you're supporting that breeder with your dollar, and you're voting for them
Mhm.
to, oh, okay, I'm gonna pay for this $500 leopard gecko so you could keep basically breeding those lemon frost and those enigmas. So that's something else that you have to take into account when you're on the market and looking for leopard geckos. If you go to someone like, again, John Scarborough for example, he's an amazing guy, produces amazing things, and does things the right way. Yeah, his leopard geckos might be a little bit more than what you'd buy from someone else, but again, the quality is there, the genetics are there. You're
Mhm.
getting someone who has been in the hobby for a really long time now. You're getting someone who's ethically on the right page with the leopard gecko hobby and moving the leopard gecko hobby forward. He supports U.S. art. You know, all these things go into
Yeah.
consideration when you're buying a leopard gecko. So not only, oh, this person has an amazing leopard gecko, let me buy it. It looks like a Maxo Shrimper. He has great reviews from this other person, but also really look deep into what this person is actually doing
Yeah.
and what they're preaching. So that's really something that I think is overlooked in the hobby, but also voting with your dollar on what leopard geckos that you're buying. Because again, if they're not getting money, if you're gonna run someone out of business because they're, say a breeder's breeding lemon frost, for example,
Mhm.
and no one is buying those lemon frost, that person is not going to breed lemon frost anymore because
Anymore.
he's not making any money, right?
Yeah.
So if you go and buy awesome tangerines from this other breeder who's breeding ethically, who has great genetics, knows all the background for their leopard geckos, you're going to keep buying from them because they're doing things the right way. And I think that's the way that we should move towards in the leopard gecko hobby, is vote with your dollar. And if someone isn't doing things right, don't just argue with them on social media and bash them on Instagram and Facebook, but just ignore them and don't buy from them, because eventually they'll either get out of the hobby, and that's, something that they did and they shot themselves in the foot for not doing things the right way, or they're going to go ahead and go on the right track and do things ethically and buy from ethical breeders and produce high quality stock that's not going to be mudding up the genetics that we already have in the leopard gecko hobby. So that's just my opinion on that. And now
Yeah.
I think that people should move forward in the leopard gecko hobby when what they're buying, and just in general how they communicate with people on all the social media stuff.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, because especially like I know people who do rescue work with animals, and like it's a very big preachy thing. Even if you're just doing rescue, do not buy like enigmas or a lemon frost. Like you think you're saving them, but you're like in their opinion that like it's not saving, or you're not like stopping them from breeding them, because you are putting money in their pocket in a sense. Like they're gonna think like they don't care if you're just doing it because it's the goodness of your heart. Like they don't care about that. Like a lot of people, to them, they're thinking, oh, well, you're still buying, so I'm going to keep producing because you're still like, you know what I mean? Like I'm still going to be making profit off of this. So like what you were saying, like just ignoring them, I think is the best point of view, because like if you constantly attack them, attention is still attention to a degree, and that gives them more traction for people to look at them, and not necessarily everyone will disagree with them. So like like you constantly being attackatory online, um, it's not really changing anything. I don't know. Like you were saying, I feel like it doesn't really change much, because like attention is still attention. Like it's still gonna attract people to them. Um, Especially like you run into a lot of that on Instagram, in the sense with a lot of people doing very, very not the best care of animals, and that even if you would like attack them or do anything like that, it's still giving them attention. Like it's not gonna, at the end of the day, like they're not gonna lose sleep over it, kind of sense. Like I don't know, like what you were saying, like the best thing to do, the best form of action, like because I agree very similarly, it's just to ignore it and not buy from them. And if people ask about them, like to try and steer them to a good breeder who ethically and knows what they're doing, kind of deal. Like I think that's the best course of action, is to suggest someone else. And that's just my opinion though.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that.
So, as someone who, a little bit to go off that topic, but still in the same area, as someone who vends at expos, what are some signs to look out for at an expo to tell if someone's like a good breeder, an ethical breeder or not? Like, what are some good ways or key indicators to doing that versus online where you have all of this information? Like, in your opinion?
Well, you definitely want to look at the quality of animals and the genetics. So, are does the breeder have leopard geckos that are listed with full genetics? If you see a breeder on a table and you see 100 normals on their table with no hets listed on their deli cup or on their display case, that's going to be a red flag right off the back. Do they
Mm-hmm.
have lineages of those animals on their display case? So that's just something from a genetic standpoint. Also, health is something that you want to take into account. Do the animals look lethargic? Do they look alert? Do they look sick? Are their eyes clear? And then also, going off to the breeder, is the breeder attentive? Are you asking questions? Are they answering? Do they seem intrigued on what you're saying? And there's just certain cues that you have to learn and pick up on
Mm-hmm.
in person, and I think that's easier than online because someone could show something online, but it could be totally different than when you actually get that animal in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're at shows, I think it's a unique way to actually go to that breeder and go ahead and ask them questions and see what animals you're working with. Some of the projects, do they align with the projects you're working with? And just really observe what that breeder is doing and make sure that it aligns with some of the
Mm-hmm.
breeding practices that either you're doing or that you'd want to see if you're receiving a gecko from that breeder.
Mhm. And as someone who has vended expos, what is your advice for people going into vending expos? Say, like, it's their first expo vending. Like, what would be your advice to someone if it's their first expo vending there or vending at an expo? I mean.
Um, well, that's kind of hard because there's so much that goes into vending an expo that I think a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't realize. And I give big props to all the show promoters out there who are putting on these really awesome reptile expos out there because there's a lot of work that goes into it. It's not just grab your stuff and go to the expo and vend. Sometimes if it's farther, you might have to get a hotel or
Mm-hmm.
even something as easy as bringing paper towels or business cards or packing everything up. And what are you going to eat at the show? As a vendor,
Yeah.
you don't really get time to use the bathroom if you're by yourself, and even if you have someone else, to leave the booth as much. So there's a lot of preparation that goes into it, and I think that's the biggest thing is make sure you're prepared because an expo, although it's 2 weekends, it's gonna be, I mean, sorry, 2 days in a
Yeah.
weekend. It's gonna be a really long weekend depending on what show you're vending at and how many people or are at the show. So just
Yeah.
be prepared for that. Really do your research on the show, the demographics of the show if you can. If there's a lot of other leopard gecko breeders there, are there a lot of snake people there? Just really do your research and be prepared as much as possible and get in contact with other people who have done expos. Give them a message on whatever that breeder's on, send them an email and really ask questions if you have those questions. But just I think being prepared
Mm-hmm.
and is really the biggest advice I could give for expos.
How many expos have you done at this point, out of curiosity?
I've done 3 expos. So my first expo was in August at the San Jose show. That was in Northern California.
Oh,
My
okay.
second expo was in November, which was the Costa Mesa Repticon in Orange County. And then my third one was this January at the Reptile Super Show in Anaheim. So
Oh, I
three
think.
shows.
Okay, I saw you at the Anaheim one. That was
Oh,
cool.
really?
Yeah, I
Oh.
was. I don't know if you remember me. I was the person that bought the Strength in Leo's t-shirt.
Oh,
Yeah, that's me. What's up?
that puts
Yeah,
some context behind because I know the name and I see people at the show, and I said that along with my last podcast that I put out on Strength in Leos, that I see amazing people there, and I gotta it's hard to always put the name,
to
like
the
the
face.
Instagram name, to people's faces. So when I
Yeah,
make that connection, that's when things really click. But
you're
yeah.
like, oh yeah. Are you actually, out of curiosity, are you gonna be at the San Bernardino Expo this upcoming, this one, or no? Out of
No, I
curiosity.
won't. Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think I'm gonna be vending any more shows until like June, July ish, because I
Oh,
don't have
okay.
that many more animals for sale. So
Yeah, no. Also, it's really expensive. Like I pay to buy a table. Like I don't know if people realize like it's pretty. It's a hefty price tag.
Yeah, it is. And not only that, but just buying, the banner and the business cards
Yeah.
and tablecloths and things just like that. Those little prices do add up. So you have to really make sure that you're getting those things accounted for to make sure that you're making a profit on the show.
Yeah, no, I agree like 100%. Um, what do you say like just to talk more about shows, like what was the most, at least for you, the most hectic show like out of the three you've worked, that was which one was the most hectic for you so far?
Definitely the Reptile Super Show, just because there was so much going on. There's
Yeah.
people that I know through social media or whatever that I wanted to go talk to and I didn't really have time to,
Mm-hmm.
or just again reptile friends and breeders that I wanted to interact with and I didn't get as much time to. Um, Attending to customers and having great conversation with people. I know sometimes I could be a bit of a talker because I'm really passionate. I'm really
Yeah.
interested in sharing leopard geckos and having conversations with people about leopard geckos and the reptile hobby, or even my podcast. It's all things that I'm really interested about. So there's a lot going on with reptile shows that you have to
Yeah.
really get done to make that trip worth it. So it's kind of a balancing act in the way that you want to go and have fun and socialize, but also you're there to go and sell
Business.
geckos essentially, and also go and talk to people and educate people, and then even before the show arriving there, and then after the show, I know at the usually the big expos, I know the Tinley shows and the Reptile Super shows, they have the US Arc auction for so going
Yeah.
and seeing how I'm gonna go and get to the auction and participate in that, and then hanging out with other breeders after the show. It's all things that you have to get done, and that's why I say sometimes it's a long day,
Two
because you're
days.
up until maybe 5 6 in the morning, and then you don't go to sleep until 11 at night, or even 12 the next day. So it's a really long day that breeders go through um to have a good time at the show, but also to be there and get work done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that show was crazy. Like I remember like actually like finding where it was like held, like just someone who was going to purchase animals and look around, like it was like probably I don't know, like for me, I haven't been to the San Jose one, but for me that was like the biggest show I've ever been to, and I was like,
Yeah,
"Whoa."
it was, yeah, even me too. That was the biggest show. I think that was the biggest reptile super show that was ever put on. And even me as a vendor, finding that venue was difficult for me since it was the first time it was ever held there.
Yeah,
I was like Friday night for a vendor setup. I was there for like 30 minutes trying to find the exact hall that it was taking place. So again, the same issues that a lot of the people who are buying geckos are having are the same issues that vendors are having.
vendors are.
So I could empathize with that.
Yeah, no, fun fact, the actual day, like showing up, I showed up like 2 hours after opening or like an hour, and finding parking was horrendous because it's right next to Disneyland, which it's like a whole nother story. Like Disneyland's
It
like,
was very hectic.
yeah, I work at
Yeah.
Disney, so trust me, like I understand. Like it gets super hectic, and I remember like actually trying to find parking. I was lucky because I'm an employee that I was just able to pull out my employee card and be like, "Let me go park in
Oh,
like
nice. Yeah.
the parking lot." But like other people, like I remember when I originally got in line, we sat in a line for like an hour and we moved maybe like half a block just to get into a parking lot. Like it
Yeah, it
was
was
crazy.
really
I don't know if the vendors, I'm sure you guys had like your own set of issues. And then actually walking into the hall, like I think they had like 6 or 7 different things going on that day. And I was like, oh, okay.
yeah, tons
Well,
of other events, and there was a lot going on that weekend.
yeah, there was a ton going on that day. Like, I think it was really cool though. Like, it's definitely I'm a show that I do hope comes back. Like, it was really, really fun, and to have something, at least for me, so close to me. Because the closest show I had before that was the Pomona one, which is like still a good hour and a half out from me. So to have something that was like 20 minutes away was like super nice. So I hope it comes back.
Yeah, yeah. It'll definitely be there every January, and then the Pomona one will stay in August.
Yeah, I was assuming that. Are you gonna be vending at the Pomona one, or do you not
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that's the plan. So
That
I'm gonna want to try to win at the San Diego show also. Um, so I think I'm gonna hit that show and then do Pomona and then San Jose also. So I think San Jose will be my last show for 2020.
Okay. You know,
Yeah.
the San Diego one's really nice. That was my first expo I ever went to. That one's a really, really nice expo. I bought
Oh,
millipedes
nice.
there.
Yeah, I've never been to that one,
You
so that'll be my
it's
first time vending and also attending
okay.
the show.
It's
Yeah.
it's smaller. It's not anything like Pomona or Anaheim. It's a smaller one, but it was like really, really nice because I saw people there that I've never really seen like at other expos that are more San Diego based. So it was a really fun one. Like you'll have fun. Like it was really cool. Um,
Yeah,
but
definitely. And I know there's a different demographic in terms of reptiles because San Diego's a really big reptile demographic and community in San Diego. So I know there's a lot of amazing people from San Diego that actually even at that show. So it'll be cool to have that different feel. It'll still be a super show, but a different feel and demographics and also the people that are going to be vending there.
so actually, as you said, you not breed, vend at the San Jose show. How much preparation actually goes into heading up to Northern California or like heading a couple hours away per se? Like what
Well, okay,
preparation
so
goes
the
into
story
that?
with that was I was actually planning to vend the Pomona show that year.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an issue with my vendor application, and I guess they received it before the deadline, but they lost track of it, and whatever would happen. But for whatever reason, I wasn't able to vend that show.
Mm-hmm.
So again, my breeder friend George from Golden Valley Reptiles, he vends that show since he's been doing that show for a while. So he's like, "Hey, why don't you go with me and then another breeder friend of mine, Sam, over at Bolden Striped? We're gonna vend that show. Why don't you come up with us?" And I'm like, "Sure." So that was actually how that became my first show. It was supposed to be Pomona, but due to
Mm-hmm.
circumstances, I went up to that show. So I was actually fortunate enough to have family in Northern California. So I went
Okay.
up Thursday. I went up Thursday, and then I stayed with them for a few days. And then just for proximity wise, I it was the hotel was like 5 minutes away, so we
Mm-hmm.
stayed in the hotel Saturday night, and then we checked out Sunday. So it was really big because it was my first show. It was 6 hours away from home. We drove
Yeah.
up there, and I had to get everything prepared. So I had to make sure the geckos were packed, and then even before, like weeks before the show, you have to make sure that you have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. You have to make sure a week to a couple of days before the show to stop feeding geckos to make sure that they're not pooping all in the deli cups while
Yeah.
you're bringing up there, and make sure you have heat packs and deli cups in your display cases, and not even that, but just stuff for yourself. Make sure something as simple as a toothbrush packing in your suitcase and clothes
Mm-hmm.
and everything. It's all things that you have to take into account, and even linguistics and timing and how everything is, where you're going to park at when you get to the show, what time it opens, what time breeder setup is. So it's a lot of things to really
Look into.
focus on, and that again goes with my advice from before. If you're organized and you're prepared before the show, it's going to make setting up and even closing down way easier. So when you get there, all you have to do is set up and then basically just do your thing and enjoy the show. So that's really the big thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm vending this show, is to make sure that I do all the hard work before. So once I get to the show, I can just have fun and talk to people.
Yeah, that's yeah, because I was like San Jose. I was like, wait a minute, and that's ooh, that's a bit of far. No, because like I know, especially like heading up to Northern California, the traffic can be kind of crazy too. Yeah.
Yeah, especially
Um,
coming from the Southern California area, going up is
oh,
it get a little hectic at times.
I don't know where you're located in SoCal, but like at least getting through LA is like super difficult. Like LA
Yeah,
traffic is
yeah.
scary. Like driving through LA traffic is like my nightmare.
Yeah, same
Um,
here.
no, but honestly, to get a bit more into it, is there something that you would want to say get a degree in to work toward with going hand in hand with breeding, or would you just want to keep this more as like a side hobby, or is there something you want to do like with a career towards like at least even like reptile related or scientific related?
Yeah, so kind of the main goal with this is, well, next year I'll be going into college and I'll be attending University of Wisconsin-Madison, majoring in zoology. Um,
Okay.
so I want to do something within herpetology and research. So that's kind of where I'm headed and what I want to do. So most likely field studies. describing species, things along those lines, and then also having my leopard gecko hobby on the side,
Hmm.
in conjunction with that, and then eventually, who knows, um, possibly going full time in the future. That's still a long way ahead,
Yeah.
but that's kind of what I'm thinking first is going into herpetology and doing research, which is something that I really love to do, is doing research on these animals in the field. So going out and collecting specimens and seeing their ranges in the wild and going over to different countries and describing new species. That's something that really interests me. So doing that
Hmm.
in conjunction with leopard gecko breeding or even going into other species, but just reptile herpetoculture in general, I think that's really where I see myself in the future.
Okay, that's really interesting. Are you going to be, when you go to Wisconsin, are you going to put a halt on breeding, or are you going to bring your stuff and continue doing that over there, like out of curiosity?
That's actually a great question because right now I have no idea. So that's even a question I'm asking myself.
Yeah.
I know that I this season I kind of went full in, so I'm basically doing a full breeding season as if nothing were to happen. But I know that once it starts getting closer to that September, August area, I'm gonna have to start moving animals and seeing where I want to do with my animals, and even who
Hmm.
knows if I can continue to breed once I get there. So that's something that I do have to really start thinking about. I've kind of been putting it on hold.
I
But the
get
plan
it.
is I want to, yeah, of course. So the plan is that I want to go and, of course, continue to breed. Maybe not in the numbers that I am. Last year, I produced just under 100 leopard geckos. So
Oh, wow.
this year, I'm going
Okay.
to produce maybe a little bit more than I did last year, maybe getting a
Hmm.
little bit over that 100 range, but continue to breed and then next year see where my numbers are at, seeing what I can do, how many geckos I can produce.
Hmm.
Of course, I'm not gonna go over my threshold, and I'd rather produce less than what I could possibly produce than go over because a lot of
Yeah.
issues could arise from that. But if not, I have no issue with um keeping a lot of my core animals, and even if I can breed, still keep a lot of the breeders that I would breed for the 2021 season it would be, and keep
Hmm.
those animals, or if not, to give those animals to a breeder that I trust and I know that could do work with great work with some of the animals that I have, because this season I did bring in quite a few rare animals that I
Okay.
wouldn't just be able to rehome for to anybody, even based on the price for what they're
Yeah.
worth. So that's a lot of things that I have to take into account for next year. And with the podcast, I still am going to produce the podcast regardless,
Hmm.
even when I do go away next year. And although I might not have the full, breeding season experience that I have with decked out geckos the past couple seasons, I'm still gonna keep pumping out episodes with the podcast, and that's still gonna continue
Well,
full
that's
throttle
awesome.
as always.
Yeah, I didn't mean any offense, by the way, by asking that. I was just like, as someone who is in college, like, I was curious, like, since you are moving, like, across state, like, I didn't mean any offense or anything.
No, 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 yeah, I'm an open book. So whatever
Okay.
questions you have, or anyone in general, feel free to ask. Not many, too many questions that could offend me. So if anybody has any questions on experiences with that or that stuff, feel free to reach out, and hopefully you can learn from my experiences and I can learn from other people's experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that's what leopard geckos is all about and what the hobby is all about. So I'm always interested in learning from other people, and hopefully people could learn from me also.
Awesome. And then to finish off before we end today, I was curious, what pairings are you working with this breeding season, or what should we look out for this season?
So, sort of the same things as always, or not always, but some of the things that I produced
Mm-hmm.
last season. A lot of great tangerine pairings that you should be seeing from us this season. Again, a lot of the gecko genetics blood stuff, and then also, the Golden Gate geckos, blood crosses, crossing that with the gecko genetics blood stuff. So again, some awesome tangerines that I mentioned a little bit about before.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of high contrast stuff, I know that's a big thing for me. um, I got G Project Atomic Chimper that's head for Raptor from
Oh,
Suburban
okay.
Geckos, Chris. So yeah, he's been producing some awesome killer geckos from those lines. And if anyone doesn't know, the G Project came from Matt Bronick over at Sasobek. So if you want to learn more about that, you could head over to his YouTube channel. It hasn't been active for a while, but that information is still there, or his Facebook page. So the G Project, and then Atomic is another line of gecko. So those two lines, the G Project and Atomic, the color and the contrast with those are just really amazing. So going off with that and crossing that into some other high contrast raptors and even into some snow trimpers and max snow raptors. So just a high contrast project in general to create some really nice um, geckos with amazing color, but also have that really
Yeah.
nice albino contrast. That's something that you should look forward to this season. Also, some bull tangerines, some tangerine bulls from different lines of those. That's something that
Hmm.
I kind of got into last year. I didn't produce that many. I'm upping the production of those this season. So some awesome bull tangerines and tangerine bulls. With that cross into white and yellow stuff. Let's see what else. I have some other projects that are kind of a secret for right
Oh,
now.
okay.
So some new genetics we brought over to Decked Out Geckos. If you aren't following us on Instagram, you might have gotten a hit to what I've got, but some new genetics. Hopefully producing some um world's first. We'll see how that all plans out
Oh, that
based on
sounds
the
exciting.
odds. Yeah, it's gonna be super exciting. Um, a lot of money pumped into it, so hopefully it pays off, and we'll see what we get.
Oh, that's really exciting. I'm definitely excited now. I'm gonna look out for that. But thank you again so much, man, for coming on today and taking time out of your day to come on and talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Thanks again. Have a good night.
You too.